What Putin did, Philip, is he threw away that diplomatic advantage last Thursday. Absolutely threw it away. And again, Ukraine and Europe, who I think have played a pretty good hand here. I can criticize the Europeans for being slow at times, but I think in the past few months, they've worked really, really well with Ukraine. They know that they've got this set piece coming up with Pope Francis's funeral at the Vatican. And so it's not just going to be Zelensky's going to be there. Macron's going to be there. The Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, is going to be there. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is going to be there. And there aren't going to be any Russians there.
Hello and welcome to Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. Now, today, on Donald Trump's 100th day in office as the 47th President of the United States of America, we couldn't have anyone better than Professor Scott Lucas to come and tell us what he thinks his first 100 days have been like and what we're going to see over the next 1,300, I think it is. Scott, welcome back to Frontline.
Right, Philip, thank you so much.
Now, as I said, today's 100th day. It's actually day 1162 of Vladimir Putin's 10-day special military operation. But I think 100 days is something that, in American terms, came from Freddie Roosevelt's time whenever it was trying to reset the economy. But it has become this mythical aiming mark for new presidents to get to. We still don't have peace in Ukraine. Has Donald Trump failed?
Well, I'm not sure Donald Trump is the one who holds the key to getting a settlement in Ukraine, Philip, with respect to Donald Trump's thoughts about himself. I mean, let's start off with realities. You don't get an end to the Russian invasion in Ukraine unless and until Vladimir Putin decides he wants to stop that invasion, right? Now, at this point, Vladimir Putin, and this was reiterated by his foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, just yesterday, does not intend to end that invasion unless they get a complete capitulation of Ukraine. And by capitulation, that means not just what the Americans have offered or had offered Kyiv 2 weeks ago, which is legal recognition of Crimea by the United States. Quick reminder, only 6 other countries that actually recognize Crimea as Russian. If I remember right, the U.S. would be joining North Korea, Syria, Assad Syria, Afghanistan, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, esteemed company. Legal recognition of Russia's seizure of Crimea, de facto recognition of Russia taking at least parts of 4 Ukrainian regions in the east and in the south. The Kremlin wants even more. They stated this yesterday. They want all the 4 regions, even though they don't control parts of them. A lifting of sanctions on Moscow, the restoration of U.S.-Russian economic relations. In return, what does Ukraine get? They get no entry into NATO. That's barred. They get no security guarantees, effective security guarantees from the West. The Americans say they can join the EU, and the Russians aren't saying anything about that at this point. But the American proposal and the Russians are offering nothing in terms of Ukrainian recovery, in terms of substance, right? So, Vladimir Putin continues to want to conquer this country, grab part of it, and get rid of the Zelensky government. Okay, now that's a fundamental. Now you flip it to the other side and you say, well, will the Zelensky government accept that? Will they accept losing 25% of their country, including some of it not just because of Russian occupation, but because of legal recognition that it's Russia? Will they accept being handcuffed in terms of their security while Russia has no limits on its own pursuit of its military power? Will they accept limits on their road to recovery? And will the Zelensky government accept its downfall? And I think the answer is no. All right, sorry to set that all out, but that's the reality. That's what you walk into.
But it's important, and I think in that, Donald Trump had proposed that the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant gets back under Ukrainian control and is jointly run with the Americans. The Russians have said no to that, and the Russians have also said that they don't want the international community providing any rearmament capability to the Ukrainian military so that they can build themselves up again. To me, this sounds like a capitulation plan. But after we saw Trump sitting down with that spectacular photograph of him and Zelensky, crouching together in the Vatican at the Pope's funeral. Trump came out and said he thought Putin was tapping me along. Um, we're getting mixed messages across the board.
So let's walk through the past 2 weeks, which is important, right? So take 2 weeks ago, well, actually 13 days ago, April 17th, you get the Americans in Paris telling the Europeans in Ukraine, here's this one-page document you have to accept, right? This is Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, Donald Trump's envoy, the real estate developer, Steve Witkoff. And they tell Kyiv in Europe this. And what exactly does it set out? Okay, the legal recognition of Crimea, the de facto recognition of Russia holding at least parts of the 4 other regions, the restored U.S.-Russia economic relations, which means an end to sanctions, which you can't have anyway. The limits on Ukraine's security with the ban on going into NATO, the possibility the U.S. could get the rare earth minerals deal with Ukraine, but their priority quite clearly being in terms of what they can get with Russia while Ukraine struggles to recover. Now, that's what the Americans present, right? And I'm sitting there at that point going, Kremlin's got to be jumping for joy for this. You know, this is their guy. This is Trump and the guys around Trump, people like J.D. Vance, people like Witkoff, who effectively are presenting the Kremlin's demands as an American plan. Okay. Now, we were at the point where last Wednesday, so 6 days after that proposal was issued, Ukraine and Europe were going to meet the Americans again in London. And Ukraine had let the Americans know through the Europeans, we're not accepting this. Instead, we're going to propose a 30-day interim ceasefire, and we'll discuss details of what might be possible, but this isn't going to be possible. Now, when Rubio heard that, the Secretary of State said, I'm not coming to London. I'm not coming to London. And Witkoff was like, oh, I'm not coming either, but I'm going to go to Moscow at the end of the week and see Vlad, right? And now you're thinking, holy smokes, man. It's like, okay, the Trump folks are not only going walkabout here, they are completely going and siding with Putin. But there was a thing here that I think almost no one noticed, Philip, if you don't mind me doing this deep dive, because it's the way you try to get the handle on it before Trump's flip.
No, I think it's important because we do miss a lot of the subtleties because it's moving so fast.
Is that Keith Kellogg, who's Trump's envoy to Ukraine, did go to London. So, and there were other American staff who would have been there with Kellogg, and they talked to what was really high-level Ukrainians. Presidential Chief of Staff Andrei Yermak was there, Defense Minister Rustem Umerov, and of course, high-ranking UK, French, and German representatives are there as well. So there were some substantive talks going on, which points to the fact that there is a split in the Trump administration, right? So that's last Wednesday, right? Now, I'm still thinking at this point, and this is where I really like to see you get a Russian expert on to explain this, because I'm still thinking the Russians have got the advantage here because they can simply portray Ukraine as rejecting a sensible American proposal, which has many of their demands, right? All they have to do is sit back for a few days, keep pushing the line of that Zelensky doesn't want a peace deal, Trump's deal, and they're going to come out on top. Even if you don't get the ceasefire, they look like the good guys. And then, so help me, the day after that London meeting, when Rubio didn't go, and just before Witkoff's going to go to Moscow, so this is last Thursday, Russia lobs 70 missiles and 145 drones at Ukraine overnight. A lot of them are aiming at Kyiv, and you get a mass murder of 12 people in Kyiv, and they injure 90, right? And Russia kills people on a daily basis. I just posted on the latest casualties. But usually it's under radar because it's in places removed from the capital. It's right. This time, because journalists are in the capital, they're in Kyiv, and they're having to go through the air alerts. This is headline news across the world, right? What Putin did, Philip, is he threw away that diplomatic advantage last Thursday. Absolutely threw it away. And again, Ukraine and Europe, who I think have played a pretty good hand here. I can criticize the Europeans for being slow at times, but I think in the past few months, they've worked really, really well with Ukraine. They know that they've got this set piece coming up with Pope Francis's funeral at the Vatican. And so it's not just going to be Zelensky's going to be there. Macron's going to be there. The Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, is going to be there. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is going to be there. And there aren't going to be any Russians there. There are not going to be any Russians, right? So on Saturday, and you've just flagged it up, but I want to go deep on what happens. You get that setup where you get 15 minutes of FaceTime with Trump. Zelensky gets that FaceTime, right? It's not a White House meeting. J.D. Vance is not there, thank God. Marco Rubio is not there. It's just him one-on-one, and you get that dramatic shot in St. Peter's Basilica of them on the two chairs right next to the mosaic of Jesus being baptized, right? Now, I want to pause here and say something, because you'll know this, Philip. You'll know this from working in media as well as working in defense and in security. Shots like that are carefully set up. They are absolutely choreographed, right? And indeed, if you look at a little bit of video footage before it sets up, you can see them arranging to get the chairs there, to get the two guys in the chairs, and you can see Emmanuel Macron there, right? That would have been the team, that would have been the American team, the Ukraine team, and the European team collaborating in terms of the optics of what you were going to get. And the Americans who would have set that up would have known that the optics would have been favorable to Zelensky. They would have known that. Again, who is not there? Vance is not there. Witkoff's not there. All the people who have no interest in European security and Ukrainian security, it's that other part of the Trump administration, the career officials who are sitting there and talking about it, because the one high-ranking American official, and almost no one noticed this, the one high-ranking U.S. official that was in Italy for the funeral and beyond it was Mike Waltz, the national security advisor.
Ah, I hadn't picked that up. And the other thing that struck me was that meeting happened after Steve Witkoff would have briefed Donald Trump on the outcome from his meeting with Putin in Moscow.
Yeah, but let's walk that back, because that is what Witkoff met, I think, Putin on the Friday. I think it was the Friday. So he meets him on the Friday, right? Now, here again is the opportunity for the Kremlin to regain diplomatic advantage after screwing up and knocking the hell out of Kyiv and carrying out the mass murder. They've got Witkoff in that room, right? And in one sense, the Kremlin wins this. In another sense, they lose it. The way they win it is they make Witkoff look like an absolute blithering fool. Now, I'm not going to comment on whether I think Witkoff is an absolute blithering fool, because that would be unfair in respect to the real estate developer and purported envoy, Steve Witkoff. And that would be unfair, right?
No comment as well, yes.
So, and you're going to know where I'm going to go with this video clip, right? Putin greets him in English, which I don't think he does it that often, right? So he's going to greet him in, then he's going to show him to this table. Putin's got Yuri Ushakov, his foreign policy advisor, right next to him. I'm Kirill Dmitriev, who is the economic and financial advisor. He got high-powered folks with him. Witkoff goes up to the table, and there's no one there except a young woman on the side of the table. No other American officials that are there, right? And he looks at her. He doesn't know who she is. He is going into me, and then he goes, I think he says, like, oh, you're the translator, or you're the translator. And then, are you from the embassy? How can you not know whether or not this person is from the embassy? From a security aspect, you pretty much would want to know that. And from a diplomatic aspect.
But that's, you know, he's not a diplomat. He's got no experience in this whatsoever, and that I'd put down as an embassy failure, unless he's arrogant enough to turn around and say, "I've got this by myself," so push the embassy away.
Who the hell's in the embassy over there? Are they all just simply Trumpists who thought this was a great idea to throw Witkoff in there? Or are they scared to do this properly? Anyway, and then the video comes out, and it was on Russian channels as well, and it's like Putin's, yeah, I got the Americans, I got Witkoff here. But of course, the reason why it's failure here is that those images get replayed back in America. And those people who aren't so sure that you want to be allied with the Kremlin are going, we're getting played. So that's on the Friday. We're getting played. And then God knows what Witkoff told Trump, because the last time he went over and met Putin, he was telling Trump how Putin's his best friend, because he felt so sorry about when Trump almost got assassinated that he went and prayed for him, right? So goodness knows what he tells him. But the other folks, the folks whose names you're not going to hear about, they do that briefing of Trump where they go, okay, you're going to sit down. You got Zelensky. We had the attacks. The Russians haven't accepted the ceasefire. And then we don't know what Zelensky said in 15 minutes. So I am speculating here. But my read of this, especially on what the Ukrainians said afterwards, is Zelensky would have, if you look at the body language on those shots as it was staged, he's leaning forward into Trump as if he's trying, and he tries to explain. He did the same thing in the White House. But this time, instead of JD attacking him, Trump is actually engaging. Trump's actually doing that, whether he wants to do it for the photo op or he sincerely is hearing it. But Zelensky's got 15 minutes to say, they're attacking us. They have not accepted your proposals for a ceasefire for weeks, for months. This is their response, not only to us killing us, this is their response to you. That's what. And then Trump goes onto social and has that pop at Putin, where he specifically refers to the attacks, and then says, and this says a lot, because you know what Trump's ego is. Effectively, he, what's the phrase? Not he's playing me, but that whole idea that
tapping me along was the phrase.
He's tapping me along, and Trump's not going to like that. Trump's not going to, like, even though we know he gets played by Putin, he's not going to like that idea. So long story to where we are now as I speak to you on a Tuesday after that meeting is the Russians have dug their heels in despite this sham announcement for a 3-day ceasefire by Putin, which I'm going to let rip on in a minute. Zelensky's come back and restated the 30-day ceasefire argument, which is just the window opens back up for the discussions.
But how do you think Trump's going to read that? Because clearly what we've seen in the last 48 hours is Lavrov come out with the standard Russian peace plan. We want everything, and we want even more. Thinking that Donald Trump's going to roll over and go tickle my tummy, and then just after that, Putin comes out with the let's smile at this. Here's an offer of a 30-hour ceasefire, but he only wants it because it's the 9th of May. May Day parade in Moscow. And I think Zelensky's come back very strongly by turning around and saying that we value lives, not parades. A real ceasefire must start immediately and be at least 30 days, not just a pause in killing for a few days. And that's what Donald Trump will be waking up to this morning. Do you think Trump will hear Zelensky or hear Putin?
It depends on who briefs Trump in Washington, in part. And it depends on what happens again in terms of what grabs headlines in the next few days. But where we stand with this, let's break down, first those developments. Again, continuing my, line of what the hell are the Russians playing at here? Sergei Lavrov's a hell of a skilled diplomat. He's a tough diplomat. He's a nasty piece of work in terms of what he'll fight for. But you gotta respect him in terms of
But he knows what he's doing, and he's doing it from a Russian perspective and looking after Putin, and he's unfortunately very good at it.
Yeah, but looking after him with this latest, so when I got wind of this is Lavrov, who was flagging it up in a Brazilian newspaper. He's given an interview with O Globo, and it's like,
and he's crossed with BRICS, and BRICS is an interesting organization in itself.
Yeah. So what's Lavrov playing here? Like I said, if you're the Russians, why aren't you giving a bit more space for Ukraine to reject and doing this? Why are you going back in and going beyond the U.S. proposal? Because there's a key difference between that U.S. proposal from 2 weeks ago and what Lavrov is restating. Remember, the Americans, although they pretty much were carrying out the Kremlin's duty, said that they would give de facto recognition only to the areas that the Russians occupy, those 4 regions, right? Now, Ukraine holds part of those 4 regions. What does Lavrov say? Does he say, oh, yeah, that's fine, we'll take that? No, he says, no, we have to have all 4 regions. We have to have all 4 regions. Now,
and he's been consistent. Him and Putin have been consistent with this the whole way through. They've never changed their mind on that.
Yeah, but at this point, there's a changed context here. They have gone beyond what the Americans have come in with, right? Now, and the State Department over the weekend restated, we are not going to accept, we're not proposing, I think I said, we're not proposing that Russia gets all of all of the regions. So the Americans have put the line out there. Now you could say Lavrov and Putin are playing to a domestic audience. You could do that. You could say that they're going in with the idea that you negotiate very, very high and that you come in on a demand that they pick up on. But in the context of what's happened in the last 2 weeks, especially that meeting on Saturday between Trump and Zelensky, I think it's a clinker of a statement by Lavrov. And I think Zelensky's response is absolutely how you play it here, which is uh, that Ukraine and Europe have made statements in general in terms of territorial sovereignty. They've made statements regarding security guarantees. We know that, but Zelensky's keeping focus on 30-day ceasefire, right? 30-day ceasefire. So what does Putin do? Because Putin knows, okay, I got to play it being the nice guy here. And when I first saw the news flash yesterday, it just came up on my phone as Putin announces 3-day ceasefire. And I thought, oh, he's announced an immediate 3-day ceasefire to regain the diplomatic advantage. Pretty smart move here after screwing it up. And then of course, the details came out. It's like, oh, it's from May 8th to May 11th, around, as you mentioned, Victory Day, where the Russians celebrate defeating the Germans in World War II. And I thought, what the hell? That's 10 days from now, dude. And it's like,
He just doesn't want the threat of air raids over Moscow when that's going on.
but yeah, exactly. And it's like, and in the medium, and so what Zelensky calls out is what everybody thought is what are you going to do in the next 10 days? And indeed, the Russians were attacking with drones this morning. I think they had 100 drones they put up overnight. And it's like, so in the next 10 days, you're going to see the Russian attacks. So everybody's going to realize this was a sham announcement from Putin, just like the Easter ceasefire for 30 hours was a sham. I, I, I don't want to make this too rosy for Ukraine. They're still in a really, really difficult situation. But in terms of diplomatically, I think Ukraine's in the best situation it has been in since Trump took office.
Tactically, I agree with you. I think operationally and the impact that they're having on Russia's ability to continue to prosecute the conflict, Ukraine is in a much better position, and that's something that I think we should analyze in detail at some stage in the future. But you know, we're coming to the end of our time. Donald Trump's got another 1,300 days in office before he moves on. What do you think the worst case scenario is, the best case scenario is, and the most likely scenario is?
For Ukraine or for the rest of the world?
Well, I think let's start with Ukraine because the rest of the world might be one step too far at this stage. But I think it will direct give impetus to the direction that the rest of the world will go.
Yeah, I just start. I won't go worst versus best on Ukraine, but I'll start with what I think needs to be done, and that is, and I think to an extent it is, and that is Ukraine and its international backers, especially Europe. Europe's in the lead on this one. Have got to continue to reinforce not only what they're proposing to bring the invasion to an end, they've got to step it up regarding the security aspects of this, and that's the security aspects first and foremost, that Ukraine's got to have material to hold the lines on the battlefield, including in the east. It's got to have the air defenses, because if you keep an eye on the figures, Ukraine is downing fewer drones these days. They're still downing quite a few of them, either by electronic countermeasures or by direct interception. But there are a few that are quite a few getting through now. So you've got to try to bolster the air defenses, especially if the Russians, although they have diminishing missile stocks, if they launch a big volley like they did last week. You've got to continue to support Ukraine defense production. You've got to pursue those defense investment plans, because you're playing a long game here. I mean, the fact of the matter is that you and I both realize, and the Ukraine realizes, that the Russians are going to occupy part of the country. They know that, right? And what you have to do is that the rest of Ukraine you've got to secure that. You've got to put it in a position for economic recovery. And I've used this analogy, and I'll keep using it again and again. It's West Germany versus East Germany.
Well, and therefore it's setting the conditions for the diplomatic return of the captured Ukrainian territories at some stage in the future, like West Germany, East Germany.
Yeah, and that could be some time, and I think Ukrainians have to realize that. Then you have to realize that we're talking about European security here. So you have to talk, first of all, immediate frontline security. You've got to make sure the Poles, the Baltic states, are secured in case Putin gets any ideas. But I think the bigger thing, rather than a direct, conventional military security, is you've got to look at what you're doing versus Russian hybrid warfare. And I'll just tell you briefly, when everything went out in Spain and Portugal yesterday, and in southwest France. And whether you had the same thoughts.
You weren't the only one who thought that.
Yeah. Now it turned out not to be the case. We've got to emphasize that, but it's like, wait, because again, the Kremlin is not exactly acting in a way that I think is completely what you might consider sensible. So they could have overreached. So you've got to talk about protecting electricity grids. You've got to talk about cybersecurity. You've got to talk about maritime security, which is a real priority. You'll know, and if you come over and visit me in Ireland, is the fact that Ireland is still free riding on maritime security. So we need to be doing something about it.
That is subject to another discussion, I think, because I've got lots of ideas on the threat to Ireland.
Yeah, but more immediately, you got to talk about, for example, up in the Baltic, right? In terms of that, and even off the UK coast and off the coast of Spain and Portugal.
Yeah, and the threats are the hybrid threats there. But Scott, I think we're coming to the end of our time, unfortunately, in this. But I think that's given a very clear understanding of where we need to be looking at and helping Ukraine in the future. And Donald Trump will be waking up, I think, as this gets published up online. So I'll caveat everything that we've said with the fact that it may change in a tweet.
It could change in a tweet. So let me give this as my closer, especially if Donald is viewing Frontline, which he should, and that is, it's not yet time to go to the bunkers as much as a threat that the Donald poses, but it does require that clear eyes and cool heads, and that is, you've got to cut through all the social media white noise on this. And you have to talk about planning, which goes across political, economic, and military. And you have to do it without paying attention first and foremost to the social media, because the trolls are going to come in. And Donald Trump's a troll, right? And the fact here is at some point we have to realize that security, not just for Ukraine, but for Europe, including the UK, has got to begin here and not wait on what the Americans do.
I couldn't agree more. Scott, as ever, it's been a real pleasure talking to you today on Frontline. And I think you've set the conditions for us to have to do this an awful lot more. So thank you.
Look forward to it. Stay safe, stay sane.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like to be amongst the first to get exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership at the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs or read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.